We're going to do some examples of characters with the character sliders. My name is Gina. I'm an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. I'm going to leave this comment up here so you can go get some context if you would like, but we are talking about the 3 different sliders of a character's competency, sympathy, and proactivity, and why this makes them a likable character that people want to root for. Ready, set, go. We're going to start off with Lorelai Gilmore. I think that all of her sliders are like right down the middle. She is at a 5 at everything, which makes her a very balanced and nuanced character. She will dip down into like the 4s and the 3s, or she will come up to the 6s and 7s, but she is rarely a 10. She is rarely a 1. There are a couple of times in which she is highly sympathetic. When Christopher abandons her for a second time to go be with Sherry, your heart breaks for her. She is very, very sympathetic in that moment. But she's a good mom, but a terrible friend. She's good at running the inn, but she's terrible with her own personal finances, right? Like she slides around. She's kind of in the middle. She is not hyper any of these things. Katniss Everdeen, hyper competent. At the beginning, she is not proactive, she is reactive. She didn't volunteer to go into the Hunger Games from the beginning to save everybody. She only reacted to Prim being chosen. She's very reactive. She hesitated, didn't want to go into the woods with Gale. She didn't want to run off. She doesn't proactively solve her problems. She is reactively solving her problems. She is also not particularly sympathetic beyond just being a damsel in distress, but her hyper competence makes you forget that she is in so much distress and then she's not likable. She's not nice. She's not kind. You don't want to be friends with her. In fact, that's like 50% of the book is everyone telling her like, be nicer or you're going to be killed faster. Over time, she becomes more sympathetic, she becomes more proactive, and in those spaces, you suddenly start to see her competency dwindle. She's not as good at it. She isn't as competent, so the competency slider dials back as the sympathy and as the proactivity dials forward. They stay in balance. Jean Valjean is very similar, super hyper competent at rebuilding his life, at being a pillar of the community, but he's not proactive. He is extremely reactive. It is constantly like, oh no, the law has found me again. I must go on the run. Like he can never stay 2 steps ahead. He is always like being pushed out the door at the last second. He is also a very sympathetic character. You absolutely, your heart goes out to him because he was dealt an unjust sentence. He was being dealt with unfairly. This character was written to be extremely sympathetic. He stole food for a starving child. That was his original crime. You are supposed to be very, very sympathetic towards this character. We have a really common story arc for male characters like Peter Pan, like D'Artagnan from Three Musketeers, and even like Lightning McQueen. They are hyper competent, they are hyper proactive, they go after what they want in life, they are very, very good at what they are doing, but they are not particularly sympathetic. They are assholes. They, over the course of their story, have to learn to dial back on the proactivity, to be bad at something new, so we dial back that competency, and it helps them become more sympathetic over time. Contrast this with a lot of women characters. Baby from Dirty Dancing is another one in which at the beginning she doesn't even know how competent she is at anything, if anything. Like she's testing the water, she is trying to see if she might be good at something. She is not particularly proactive at the beginning, but she is sympathetic. Women and girls see themselves in her, that they see and they understand, they feel that like hesitation. As they become more proactive, they discover and uncover competencies, and then they become less sympathetic, right? You no longer have to root for them because they don't need you anymore. It becomes them growing into their own competencies. In an ensemble, they will take turns sliding these things around, sliding them back and forth. You cannot have one character staying at a 10 on something all of the time. Part of the way that they made Nick Miller a more attractive character was to highlight like, oh, he actually is competent. He just likes being a bartender. He is not a loser. He's a guy who didn't want that high pressure life. That's part of how they made him more attractive. Schmidt's not a very sympathetic character early on, so they gave him a sad backstory in which he had been overweight and bullied and ostracized, and so you were more sympathetic towards this guy who had been an asshole up to that point. In fact, that's a very popular way of dealing with the asshole character, is they give him a very sad backstory to make him more sympathetic. They're not going to change competency because that's kind of like written in stone. They're always like hyper competent at their jobs. They are proactive to a certain degree, but you had to change the sympathy in order to make people like them. This is a very popular tactic, especially in an ensemble. It worked so well in this show that people thought he deserved the hero's ending at the end of the show. This is an interesting one because I think that he is competent at certain things, things that aren't worthwhile in the world that he lives in. He's a good artist, he's charismatic, but none of those things fill his belly. None of those things are going to support him. So he's very poor. It makes him sympathetic. Your heart goes out to him that he's got all this talent and all this charisma, but he can't use it in any way that is meaningful. This is Jack from Titanic, by the way, just in case you're not a millennial woman. He is extremely proactive. He not only like wins the game that gets the tickets onto the Titanic, he sweet talks his way on there past the security checkpoints. He's the one who approaches a woman in first class who is way out of his league. He is very, very proactive. Why does it work for all of his sliders to be pinged over to a 10? Because you know he's going to die. You go into this movie, you know how the Titanic ends. You're waiting for the ship to sink. You know that this character cannot survive. It does not matter that he is talented and proactive and charismatic and has all of this going for him. It does not matter because he is the tragedy. There you go. Those are the three sliders. That's how we see him in action. And again, you are going to disagree with me on these. There are going to be people who are like, I absolutely do not think that Lorelai Gilmore is competent at anything. And this is part of what makes these characters interesting and nuanced, is if these things are all in balance, you can disagree about them. You can see them differently. You might think that she is ultra sympathetic but not competent, or you might see her as hyper competent but not sympathetic, because you are focusing on a different part of the character. You are focusing on a different aspect of her. If all of those things are all to a 10 all of the time for the character, it makes it very hard to root for them. Same if they are all at a 0 all of the time. It's very, very difficult for people to like your characters.